Captain Jack's Morrow's day had officially gone from bad to apocalyptic somewhere between the moment he woke up and discovered his coffee machine was still bust, and the point when an earthen warship decided to play tag with his freighter. The Vigilance was many things, but Speedy wasn't one of them. Is it me, or are they getting a bit too close for comfort? Rin said, jabbing a thumb over her shoulder at the view screen. The jagged outline of the earthen ship looked like someone had taken a cheese grater to a nightmare. Relax, Rin. It's not like they can smell the fear, Jax replied, slouching in his command chair like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, preferably somewhere with a working coffee machine. Rin snorted. If they could, we'd be dead already. I'm sweating enough to fill a small lake. Charming image. Just keep us from becoming earthen sushi, would ya? Jack swiveled his chair to face the console, fingers flying across the worn keys with all the enthusiasm of a man paying taxes. The Vigilance shuddered as a blast rocked its hull. If the freighter had feelings, Jax was sure it'd be crying right now. Hell, maybe it was. Shields are down to 60%, chimed in Zeke, the ship's engineer and unofficial morale destroyer. I'd say we've got about 5 minutes before we're a lovely constellation of space debris. Great. Just enough time to reconsider all my life choices, Jax muttered. He thought back to when he'd bought the Vigilance, the sales pitch promising reliability and performance. He should have known better than to trust a ship dealer that looked like he'd slithered out of a crime novel. There's the old Morrow optimism, Rin quipped. What's the plan, Captain Plan? Oh, you mean besides not dying in a vacuum? Jax tapped a few more buttons, contemplating the odds of success. Slim to none, but that was still technically odds. We've got one trick left. I've been saving it for, well, something like this. Let me guess, Zeke said, his tone as dry as a Martian sandstorm. It involves something illegal or stupid or both. Bingo. Jax grinned, though it didn't reach his eyes. Ready the decoy drones. We're going to give them something shiny to chase. Zeke shrugged, already moving to the drone controls. You know, in another life, I'd probably be complaining about this kind of thing. Yeah, but in this life, you signed up for it. Jax glanced back at Rin. Plot a course for the nearest jump point. We need to be gone before they realize the drones are full of crap. I thought they were full of explosives, Rin said, eyebrow raised. Same difference, really. The Vigilance groaned again, another blast shaking loose a shower of sparks from the ceiling. Jax winced as he felt the rumble in his boots. That's just the ship encouraging us. Let's move, people, the console beeped, displaying a countdown to self-destruction. Jax had never been fond of alarms, especially ones that promised imminent death. All right, drones away, Zeke announced, pressing a button with the glee of a kid launching fireworks. On screen, a cluster of drones shot out from the Vigilance, each emitting signals mimicking their ship's own. A distraction, a glittering array of false promises in the vacuum. Let's hope the Earthens are as dumb as they look, Rin whispered, her fingers dancing over her navigation controls. Luck is for the unprepared, Jax replied, though he was pretty sure they needed more than luck. Maybe a miracle or a well-timed deus ex machina. The Earthen ship veered, weapons locking onto the decoys. Jax could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from his crew, a small mercy in a universe that rarely offered any. Course plotted, Rin confirmed, her voice tense. Ready to hit the jump point and get the hell out of here. Punch it, Jax ordered, trying not to hold his breath. It wasn't like he needed oxygen or anything. The Vigilance lurched forward, engines straining against the void. The cockpit's dim lighting flickered, threatening to plunge them into darkness. Remind me to fix that, Zeke said, staring pointedly at the ceiling. Fix what? The lights or your attitude? Rin shot back, grinning despite the situation. Both, Jax said. But let's survive first, mock later. The ship streaked towards the jump point, the cosmos blurring into an abstract painting of stars and black holes. Jax gripped the armrest, knuckles white, as the Vigilance strained against physics and fate. Then silence. The oppressive hum of the engines shifted into a dull roar as they passed into jump space, leaving the Earthens gnashing their metaphorical teeth in the void behind them. Jax released a breath he didn't know he was holding. Well, that was fun. Define fun, Zeke said, peeling himself off his chair. Something that doesn't involve getting blown up, Jax replied. All right, folks, let's take stock. Damage report. The ship's been banged up worse than my grand's old hovercar, Rin said, scanning her console. We've got hull breaches in the aft and one of the thrusters is leaking fuel like a sieve. Added to the list, Jax sighed. Anything else? Yeah, Zeke said, glancing at his monitor. Our mystery package is still intact. Whatever the Earthans think we've got, they really want it. Great. Nothing like being popular, Jax muttered. He leaned back, eyes closing for a moment of respite. All right, let's find somewhere to lay low. We need repairs and a solid plan before they catch up. Got a couple of hidey holes in mind, Rin replied. We'll be fine, Captain. We always are, yeah, until we're not. Jax rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his decision settle like a lead blanket. But for now, we've bought ourselves some time. Let's use it wisely. The crew dispersed, each to their own corner of the battered Vigilance. Jax remained, staring at the stars streaking past like so many missed opportunities. He didn't know what the future held, but he was damn sure it'd be interesting, whether he liked it or not. As the Vigilance sailed on through the void, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Earthans wouldn't stop, and neither would whatever ancient secrets they were unwittingly tangled in. But that was a problem for tomorrow. For now, he had a ship to keep afloat and a crew to lead and maybe, just maybe, a universe to save. But first, he needed a drink. Jax Morrow felt like he'd traded his captain's chair for a seat on a roller coaster designed by a psychopath. The Vigilance was in jump space, sure, but that didn't mean they were safe. Not by a long stretch. The Earthans had a way of making sure you never felt safe. It was a talent of theirs, right up there with genocide and interstellar extortion. The cockpit was filled with the comforting sounds of malfunctioning equipment. Zeke was poking at the console with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for cleaning a toilet. Rin was at the navigation controls, face set with the determination of someone trying to open a particularly stubborn pickle jar. We're still leaking fuel from the thruster, Rin said as if she was commenting on the weather. Fantastic, Jax replied, tapping at his own monitor. Fuel's overrated anyway. Who needs to move in space, right? Zeke snorted. We could always just float here indefinitely. Nice to know we've got options. Great plan, Zeke. We'll just wait for the Earthans to catch up and ask them to join us for tea. Jax rolled his eyes, though he had to admit, sarcasm was a welcome distraction from impending doom. The artifact in question, a sleek, obsidian black cube, sat in the corner of the cockpit like a particularly judgmental paperweight. It was the reason they had a warship breathing down their necks, and Jax couldn't decide if he wanted to shoot it out an airlock or keep it just to spite the Earthans. Still haven't figured out what it does, have we? Rin nodded towards the cube as if it might decide to start talking any minute. Pretty sure it's not a coffee machine, Zeke said, eyeing it with distrust. Nope, Jax replied, leaning back in his chair. But whatever it is, the Earthans want it bad, which means it's either incredibly valuable or just as likely to explode and take us with it. Sounds like my ex, Zeke muttered, eliciting a snort from Rin. Jax drummed his fingers on the armrest, contemplating their next move. All right, let's assume the worst-case scenario. We jettison the thing and hope it takes the Earthans with it. Thought's ship might get a little lighter, but so would our pockets, Rin pointed out. You know what they say, no risk, no reward. Yeah, except in space it's more like no risk, no oxygen, Zeke added, his usual tone of doom and gloom present as ever. Whatever that thing is, it's trouble. And we're somehow dumb enough to be stuck with it. Look, we need to deal with this while we still have time and before we're out of options, Jax said, trying to sound more decisive than he felt. That means finding a port where we can lay low and fix the damage, and maybe get some answers about this damn cube. Rin glanced at the navigational charts on her display. There's an old station not too far off. It's a bit of a dive, but they've got fuel, parts, and no one asks questions unless you're paying them to. A space station that's a dive. Shocking, Jax replied with a smirk. Set a course. Let's hope they're feeling hospitable, Zeke grunted in agreement. And if they are not, we can always bribe them with the artifact. Or my charming personality. If we get out of this alive, I'm voting for never picking up strange artifacts again, Rin said, setting the course for their probable salvation, or doom. Noted, Jax replied. And I'll definitely add it to the growing list of lessons learned the hard way. As the Vigilance glided through jump space, the stars continued their dizzying dance outside the viewport, a stark reminder that somewhere out there, the Earthans weren't far behind. But for now, they had a plan, however tenuous, and that was enough to keep the anxiety at bay. The ship suddenly lurched violently, the lights flickering overhead. Jax cursed under his breath, gripping the armrest for support. What now? Looks like we've hit a pocket of turbulence in the jump field, Rin said, frowning at the controls. And by turbulence, I mean something screwing with our systems. Because of course it is, Jax grumbled. Zeke, see if you can stabilize us. I'd like to arrive in one piece if possible, sure. Let me just pull a miracle out of my ass, Zeke replied, fingers flying over his console. The ship rattled again, the usual reassuring hum of the engines now a frantic buzz. Jax felt his stomach drop as the artificial gravity wavered momentarily. It was like being on a particularly sadistic carnival ride. Got it, Zeke announced, the ship steadying under his ministrations. For now, anyway. I swear this ship's held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. I'll take it, Jax replied, exhaling slowly. Let's just hope the station's not too far off. Not far at all. Should be there in a few hours, Rin confirmed as the view screen showed the station looming into view, a rusty relic of a bygone era. It was the kind of place that had seen better days, possibly several decades ago. I've seen prettier places, Jax remarked, squinting at the patchwork of metal that somehow passed for a space station. Yeah, well, beggars can't be choosers, Rin shot back. And right now we're the biggest beggars in the galaxy. Let's just hope they've got coffee, Zeke said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I'd sell my soul for a cup right now. Wait, scratch that, I've already done that. I'd sell Jax's soul. Nice to know my soul's got some value, Jax replied, rolling his eyes. All right, bring us in for a landing. Let's see what kind of welcome we get. The Vigilance lurched forward again, engines sputtering in protest as they neared the station. Jax watched as a docking bay opened, lights flickering like the station couldn't quite decide if it was open for business or contemplating a permanent shutdown. The ship settled with a clunk that reverberated through the hull, metal groaning like an aging beast finally coming to rest. Jax powered down the engines with a sigh of relief, if not complete satisfaction. All right, folks, let's see what this place has to offer. And try not to get us kicked out before we've even docked, Jax said, rising from his chair. He cast one last glance at the obsidian cube still glinting ominously in the corner. Keep an eye on that thing. We don't want any surprises. Rin stood up, stretching like a cat. You know, for once I'd love to dock somewhere and not worry about getting shot at. Dream on, Zeke replied, already heading for the hatch. In the meantime, let's hope they've got some decent mechanics. They stepped off the Vigilance and into the station's dimly lit corridors, the air thick with the smell of grease and desperation. Vendors hawked questionable goods, and the clientele looked like they had more knives than teeth. Smells like home, Rin muttered, wrinkling her nose. Yeah, if home was a dumpster fire, Jax replied, scanning the crowd for any sign of a friendly face. Or at least a face that didn't immediately scream trouble. Let's get the parts and get out, Zeke said, eyeing a particularly shady merchant who seemed to be sizing them up. They approached the nearest vendor, a wizened old human whose expression was as inviting as a bear trap. What do you need? He rasped, voice like gravel. Fuel, thruster parts, and coffee, Jax replied, leaning casually against the counter. In that order of priority, the vendor grunted, eyeing them suspiciously. Got the first two. Cough is gonna cost you extra, fine, Jack said, trying to keep the impatience out of his voice. We don't have much time, so let's make this quick. Time is money, the vendor said with a shrug, clearly unimpressed with their urgency. He began gathering parts with the speed of a sloth on tranquilizers. As they waited, Rin's gaze darted around the crowded market. I've got a bad feeling about this place. Bad feelings are par for the course, Jax replied. Just keep your head on a swivel. We'll be out of here soon enough. The vendor returned, dumping a pile of parts onto the counter with all the grace of a toddler playing with blocks. That'll be 5,000 credits. And the cough is another 200. Highway robbery, Zeke grumbled, reaching for the credit chips. Welcome to the edge of space, kid, the vendor replied with a toothless grin. Now pay up or get lost. With a resigned sigh, Jax handed over the credits. Pleasure doing business, he said flatly. Come on, let's get back to the ship. They made their way back through the station, the eclectic mix of people and smells threatening to overwhelm even the most hardened spacefarer. Jax couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were following them, watching their every move. Back aboard the Vigilance, Zeke began the arduous task of repairing the leaking thruster while Rin busied herself with the navigation systems. Jax took the opportunity to study the cube again, wondering what secrets it held. Any chance we can just toss it out an airlock and pretend this never happened? Zeke called from beneath a console, his voice tinged with hope. Tempting, but no, Jax replied. We're in too deep now. Figures, Zeke muttered, the sound of tools clanking echoing around him. Rin glanced over, a wry smile on her face. You know, Captain, for a guy who hates trouble, you sure know how to find it. It's a gift, Jax said with a shrug. Besides, sometimes trouble finds you. With the thruster patched, at least temporarily, they prepped the Vigilance for departure. The station fell away behind them, a dim speck in the vastness of space. Where to now? Rin asked, settling into her seat. Jax considered their options, glancing at the cube once more. Let's head somewhere quiet, remote, and figure out what the hell we're dealing with. Sounds like a plan, Zeke said, though his tone suggested he was already bracing for the next disaster. As they set off into the stars once more, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. But for now, they had their ship, their crew, and their wits, and that would have to be enough. The Vigilance cut through the void, trailing a symphony of mechanical groans and rattling panels behind it. Jax leaned back in his chair, squinting at the half-functional viewscreen that was displaying more static than stars. Well, we didn't explode on takeoff. I call that a win, Jax said, adjusting the collar of his worn flight jacket as if he could somehow adjust the impending doom away. Low bar for success, but sure, I'll take it, Rin replied, her fingers dancing over the navigation controls like she was playing an old, out-of-tune piano. Course is set for the middle of nowhere. Population, us. Zeke snorted from the maintenance hatch, where he was elbow-deep in what he optimistically called engineering. Most would call it cursing at wires. Middle of nowhere's my kind of place. No neighbors to complain about the noise or the smell. Speaking of smells, Jax said, wrinkling his nose. Can we do something about the air recyclers? Smells like something died in them. Something did. Your sense of optimism, Zeke shot back. Touché, Jax conceded as he turned his attention back to the ominous black cube. It sat there, innocuous yet impossibly heavy with meaning. So what's your story, huh? Talking to it won't make it any less cursed, Rin said, glancing over her shoulder. But hey, whatever helps you sleep at night. Sleep is for the dead, Jax said, though he privately wished the artifact would at least buy them a few hours of peace. The Vigilance shuddered and the lights flickered, a dance they seemed to enjoy far too often for Jax's taste. Rin's console beeped, an urgent little trill that suggested nothing good was about to happen. Incoming transmission, she said, her tone flat. Guess who? If it's the Earthans, tell them we're not home, Zeke muttered, though they all knew it was a lost cause. Rin opened the channel and the viewscreen crackled, the image resolving into the sneering visage of an Earthan commander. His expression suggested he'd been born with a permanent distaste for humanity. Vigilance, surrender the artifact or be destroyed. the commander said, as though offering them a choice. Jax leaned in, adopting his best negotiating face, somewhere between mild indifference and utter disdain. I'd love to, but we kind of misplaced it. You know how it is. Things get lost, especially when someone's shooting at you. The Earthen scowled, a feat considering the already impressive downward angle of his features. You have one ire to comply, or we will engage. The transmission cut, leaving them in the familiar silence of near doom. Nice guy, Rin said, tapping the screen as if to erase the bad vibes. Where do they find these people? Evil University. They major in monologuing, minor in brooding, Zeke chimed in, emerging from the hatch with a disgruntled look that suggested the ship's innards had not been kind to him. All right, Jax said, clapping his hands together in a mockery of decisiveness. Time to figure out what this damn cube is before we end up as space debris. Zeke dusted off his hands and eyed the artifact with suspicion. I say we toss it into the nearest black hole and call it a day. Yeah, and when it explodes and takes out half the galaxy, who do you think they'll blame? Rin asked. Still probably us, Jax admitted. But at least we won't be around to hear it. Rin sighed, turning her chair to face him. All right, Captain, what's the plan? Jax wished he knew. But a leader couldn't afford to look clueless, even when he felt like the universe's biggest idiot. We crack this thing open, see if it gives us any hints. Maybe it's got a manual or at least a clue. Zeke snorted. Yeah, like artifact use for dummies. Stranger things have happened, Jax replied, though he didn't sound convinced. He picked up the cube, its surface oddly cool and slippery, like it wanted to slide out of his grasp and take their last shreds of hope with it. We need to figure out what makes this thing tick, Rin said, setting up a scanner. If it's important enough for the Earthens to chase us across half the galaxy, it's gotta be something. The scanner whirred to life, lights flickering across the cube's surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's system lights blinked in unison, a brief flicker that made Jax's heart skip a beat. What's it doing? Zeke asked, leaning forward like a kid waiting for a magic trick. Jax frowned. Not sure. But it's doing something. As they watched, the viewscreen displayed an unfamiliar array of symbols, followed by a string of text in an ancient script that looked like a drunk spider had taken a stroll across the screen. Well, that's helpful, Rin muttered, squinting at the gibberish. Wait, I've seen this before, Jax said, a memory stirring from some dusty corner of his mind. It's old Earth script. Pre-unification. You mean before we decided to stop killing each other and start killing aliens instead? Zeke asked, arms crossed. Something like that, Jax replied, trying to decode the symbols. I think it's coordinates. Rin's fingers flew across the console, inputting the string. The star map shifted, focusing on a sector far from their current position. Looks like we've got a destination, she said, eyebrows raised. But why there? Maybe it's where this thing was made, Zeke suggested, though his tone was colored with skepticism. Or where it's meant to be used. Guess there's only one way to find out, Jax said, though the pit in his stomach suggested he wasn't eager for the answer. All right, let's punch it, Rin said, locking in the coordinates. But we're still gonna have to deal with our Earthen friends first, Zeke grunted. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Let's just hope they're better than your last trick, Jax replied, recalling Zeke's attempt to rig the coffee machine to boost power, a plan that had ended with more sparks than caffeine. As they set the ship on its new course, the tension in the air was thicker than ever. Outside, the stars continued their dizzying dance, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around them. Think we'll make it? Rin asked, her voice low enough that it seemed like she was asking herself more than anyone else. Jax shrugged, though the gesture felt more like a lie than reassurance. We always do, until we don't. Great pep talk, Captain, Zeke called from his station. Really inspires confidence. Hey, you work with what you've got, Jax replied, though he couldn't help but wish they had a little more on their side than sheer dumb luck. Minutes ticked by as they prepped for what would inevitably be a violent confrontation, each second feeling like a countdown to something they weren't remotely ready for. The Earthen ship loomed closer, a predator closing on its prey. Got any bright ideas, Captain? Rin asked, her voice tinged with the kind of gallows humor that suggested she wasn't expecting much. Only the usual ones, Jack said, strapping himself in. Run, hide, or improvise. And if those fail, Zeke asked, his hands a blur across the controls as he readied the ship's meager defenses. Then we make it up as we go along, Jax replied, grinning like a madman. The Earthans hailed them again, their patience clearly running as thin as Jax's optimism. Last chance, humans. Surrender or be destroyed. Yeah, you've mentioned, Jax said, cutting the transmission before the threats could get any more repetitive. All right, Rin, get us out of here. Rin initiated evasive maneuvers, the Vigilance groaning as its thrusters strained against the weight of so many unfortunate decisions. The ship jolted and lurched like a drunkard on a midnight stroll, evading incoming fire with a grace that was more accidental than intentional. Zeke, how are we holding up? Jax asked, gripping his armrest with knuckles that had gone white. Shields are at 30% and dropping. We're about as durable as a wet tissue right now, Zeke replied, his usual sarcasm barely masking the urgency in his words. Great. Nothing like being outgunned and outnumbered to start the day, Jax muttered. Rin swung the ship around, diving into a nearby asteroid field with the kind of reckless abandon that would have made a lesser captain faint. Let's see how they like this, she said, weaving through the tumbling rocks with a skill that bordered on suicidal. The Earthen ship followed, its weapons lighting up the void with deadly intent. Asteroids shattered and spun in all directions, a chaotic ballet of destruction. Any chance we can lose them in here? Zeke asked, though the answer was already clear. Ideally, we'd have a plan B, Jax said, his voice tinged with a grim humor. But considering our luck, we're stuck with plan oh shit. Zeke laughed, a harsh sound that mingled with the alarms. Best plan we've got. Rin banked hard, diving deeper into the field. The Vigilance dodged and danced, escaping certain destruction by the narrowest of margins. But Jax could feel the noose tightening. Think we can draw them in closer? Zeke asked, his hands steady on the controls as he prepared for whatever came next. Jax considered the cube, its dark surface still and silent amidst the chaos. If it's got any tricks left, now's the time. Rin glanced at him, eyes skeptical but hopeful. You think it'll help? Only one way to find out, Jax said, his tone daring fate to take the challenge. As they plunged deeper into the asteroid field, the cube pulsed with a sudden light, its surface coming alive with the same ancient script as before. Jax stared, a sinking feeling mingling with curiosity. Guys, Zeke said, pointing at the view screen. The Earthen ship, caught in the same gravitational pull as the Vigilance, struggled to match their maneuvers. Its sleek hull scraped against a massive asteroid, shields flaring brightly before guttering out like a dying star. Well, that's convenient, Rin said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax nodded, though he knew better than to trust in convenient miracles. Let's not waste it, get us out of here. With the Earthans momentarily distracted, Rin punched the engines, the Vigilance roaring out of the asteroid field like a bat out of hell. The stars stretched and blurred around them as they made their escape, the Earthans left to count their losses. Okay, so what's the plan now? Zeke asked once the tension eased, though the adrenaline still thrummed through their veins. Jax looked down at the cube, its secrets still locked away behind layers of mystery. We head for those coordinates, find out what this thing is really about. And if the Earthans catch up again, Rin asked, her voice tight with the anticipation of the inevitable. Jax shrugged, a tiny grin tugging at his lips. We make it up as we go along. Just like always. As the Vigilance sped away, the universe stretched out before them, full of unknown dangers and unexpected allies. But for the moment, they had a direction, a purpose, and just enough hope to keep going. And that, as far as Jax was concerned, was a damn good start. The Vigilance cruised through space, its battered hull a testament to every close call and dubious decision they'd made. Inside, the crew's tension could have been sliced with a rusty spork. Jax Morrow, their fearless, well, mostly fearless, leader, was contemplating the chances of them reaching those mysterious coordinates without landing in a cosmic dumpster fire. He glanced at the obsidian cube sitting smugly in its corner, as if daring him to solve its mysteries. "It's like a puzzle box from hell, only without the fun of a surprise puppy at the end," he muttered. Rin, busy at navigation controls, snorted. "You think it's got a manual inside? How to ruin your life in 3 easy steps. If it does, we're already on step 2, Jax replied, eyeing the view screen which was doing its usual impression of a snowstorm in a blender. "Zeke, how's that shield booster coming?" the engineer, tangled in a mess of wires like a drunken octopus, grunted. "If by booster you mean duct tape and prayers, then we're golden. Perfect," Jax said dryly. "The Urathons'll never know what hit them." "Mostly because nothing will hit them." Just then the ship shuddered, not the usual tickle of jump space but a full-body quake that suggested things were about to get a whole lot worse. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the air recyclers wheezed in complaint. "Okay, what now?" Rin said, her voice tinged with that familiar blend of disbelief and annoyance. Jax's hand hovered over the controls like a man contemplating his own execution switch. "Status report, Zeke, shields took a hit. Down to 20%. Zeke's voice was a mix of frustration and the resigned acceptance of a man who knew he was about to get screwed 6 ways to Sunday. "Great. And here I was hoping for a nice, relaxing day of not dying." Jax rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar throb of an impending existential headache. Rin's console beeped. Captain. We've got company." The view screen crackled to life, revealing the sleek, predatory lines of an Earthen ship, close enough that Jax could practically smell its disdain. "The Urathans were like that one neighbor who never returned your lawnmower and then tried to sell it back to you at their garage sale." "Well, ain't that a picture?" Jax muttered. "What's the plan, Captain?" Rin asked, eyes flicking between the enemy ship and the navigation readouts. Her voice was steady, but there was a thread of tension underneath that you could play a tune on. "The usual, run, hide, scream." "Not necessarily in that order." Zeke cursed as a nearby panel decided it was time to explode in a shower of sparks. "That's it, we're screwed. Might as well moon them and go out with some dignity." Jax opened his mouth to respond when the ship rocked again, harder this time. The lights dimmed and the air turned sour. The cube, their little black box of mystery, pulsed ominously, almost like it was laughing at their misfortune. "Looks like we might have a traitor in our midst," Jax said, his voice a low growl. Rin locked down the ship. "Zeke, get your ass to the core and figure out what the hell's gone wrong." Before either could reply, the comms crackled and a voice, smooth as broken glass, filled the cockpit. "Humans, your resistance is admirable but futile. Surrender the artifact, yeah. Why don't you come and take it?" Jax shot back, though he was all too aware of how hollow bravado sounded in an empty sky. "Don't tempt them," Rin said, teeth gritted as she executed a series of evasive maneuvers that would have made an ice-skating elephant proud. Zeke was already halfway out the door, muttering curses that would peel paint. "If we've got a spy, I'll find the bastard. And when I do, I'm introducing them to the business end of a Hydra spanner." As Zeke disappeared into the bowels of the ship, Jax leaned back in his chair, trying to piece together the rapidly unraveling tapestry of their situation. "Rin, keep us steady. We're gonna need every micron of luck." The Vigilance shuddered again, the hull groaning as if sharing its captain's existential dread. Jax couldn't help but feel the universe was trying to tell him something. Back in engineering, Zeke was knee-deep in wires and conspiracy theories. The core was a mess of flickering lights and grinding gears, like a nightclub having a nervous breakdown. He pulled up a schematic, eyes scanning for anything out of place. And there it was, tucked away in a corner like a guilty conscience. A hidden transmitter, likely piggybacking off the ship's systems to relay their position. "Well, ain't you a sneaky little bastard," Zeke muttered, wrench in hand. Time to break a few toys. Back in the cockpit, Jax was trying to keep things from falling apart altogether. "Anything," he called over the comms. Zeke's voice crackled back, triumphant. Found our mole. Working on taking it offline. Good. Hurry it up. We're about to have unwanted guests. The Earthen ship loomed closer, its weapons charging with the kind of intent that suggested they'd skip straight past negotiation. Rin's fingers danced over the controls. They're closing in. If we don't move now, then we're toast. I know. Jax's eyes flicked to the cube, its surface a blank, mocking stare. I've got half a mind to chuck this thing out the airlock and see if they chase it. Wouldn't be the worst plan you've had, Rin replied, managing a thin smile. The Vigilance lurched, a desperate roll that bought them a few more seconds of breathing room, seconds they desperately needed. Captain, lost the transmitter. Zeke reported, barely audible over the sound of things breaking in the background. Great. Now let's see if we can lose the Earthens too, Jax replied, though from the looks of it, losing them was about as likely as finding love at a tax audit. The Earthen vessel closed the gap, its sleek lines a testament to predatory efficiency. Jax could almost imagine its crew, poised, patient, ready to pluck their prize from the jaws of incompetence. Rin's hands moved with a speed born of desperation. I've got an idea. It's stupid, but stupid's all we've got. Jax, grinning despite himself, nodded. Stupid's worked for us before. Let's hear it. There's a nebula nearby. We dive in, use the interference. It might give us an edge, or fry us like bacon in a solar flare, Jax pointed out, though he was already recalculating their odds. It's that or give up the cube. Jax considered it. The Earthens would be on them in minutes, and surrender wasn't an option. Not yet. All right, do it. Rin nodded, fingers blurring as she redirected their course. The Vigilance swung around, engines straining as they raced for the nebula's edge. The Earthens followed, relentless as tax collectors. Jax watched them close in, a silent countdown running through his mind. As they reached the nebula, the ship's systems flickered, warning lights flashing like a disco on the brink of an aneurysm. Jax held his breath, waiting for the inevitable. And then they were in. The nebula embraced them, a swirling mass of gas and chaos that was both beautiful and terrifying. The Earthen signal stuttered, their ship momentarily confused. Keep us steady, Rin, Jax said, though the words felt hollow in the face of the maelstrom outside. I'm trying, Captain, but it's like steering through soup, Zeke's voice crackled over the intercom. Whatever you do, don't stop. This place is murder on the engines, noted, Jax said dryly. We lose them yet, Rin squinted at her console. For now. The interference is jamming their sensors. But it won't last. Jax slumped back in his seat, exhaustion creeping in. Long enough for us to figure out our next move. The Vigilance drifted deeper into the nebula, a tiny speck in a sea of uncertainty. For now, they were safe. But the Earthens were still out there, waiting for the moment they could strike again. Jax eyed the cube, its secrets mocking him with their silence. Whatever it was, it had better be worth it. Think we'll make it? Rin asked, breaking the silence. Jax shrugged, the gesture more a reflex than reassurance. We always do. Until we don't. That's your pep talk, huh? Best I've got, Jax replied, though he couldn't help but wish they had a little more on their side than sheer dumb luck. As the nebula swirled outside, he knew one thing for sure. The game was far from over. And if they were going to survive, they'd need every ounce of cunning and courage they could muster. Or at the very least, a few more miracles. The Vigilance creaked and groaned like an old man getting out of bed. The nebula's embrace doing nothing to soothe the ship's aching joints. Jax Morrow peered at the viewscreen as it flickered between static and the unsettling vista outside. The Earthens might not be on their tail, but it wasn't as if the universe had run out of ways to kill them. Looks like we're still the galaxy's least favorite sitcom, Jax muttered, trying to ignore the growing headache pulsing behind his eyes. Rin, any chance we can just disappear forever in here? Rin's laugh was more a snort than anything else. Sure, Captain, if you want to become one with the nebula. Vaporized particles have a way of blending in real nice. Jax nodded, pretending he hadn't just felt his stomach drop. Good to know our backup plan is cosmic suicide. Zeke clattered back into the cockpit, covered in grime and looking like he'd spent the last hour wrestling a bear. Transmitter's gone, but we've got bigger problems. I found a couple of systems on the brink of total failure. Of course we do, Jack said, throwing his hands up. Why have one disaster when you can have a three-ring circus? Rin's fingers danced over the navigation controls. Any idea how long we can hide in here before the Earthans get their act together? Long enough for a smoke break, but not much longer, Zeke replied, wiping grease off his face with a rag that was somehow dirtier than his skin. Jax leaned back in his seat, wishing for the umpteenth time that the coffee machine wasn't just an expensive paperweight. This is it, folks, our darkest hour. Anyone want to say a few words before we go down in the annals of cosmic history as the crew who almost escaped? I'd like to mention how much I hate the Earthans, Rin said, voice as dry as the desert. Zeke nodded. And a shout-out to whatever genius thought it was a great idea to make a cube that doubles as a galactic bullseye. Jax chuckled. Well, with those inspiring words, let's see if we can't make this day a bit worse. The Vigilance shuddered again, the groans of its hull echoing the crew's collective anxiety. The nebula's interference bought them time, but not much else. In the eerie semi-darkness, punctuated by the occasional spark from a struggling console, Jax felt the weight of their predicament settle onto his shoulders like a particularly vindictive parrot. Warning, Rin announced, eyeing the sensors with a frown. Looks like the Earthans are starting to get a signal through. They're persistent, I'll give them that. Persistent like a rash, Jax said, rubbing his forehead. And just as pleasant, Zeke plopped into the engineer's seat, the springs creaking ominously. We can still make a run for it, but the engines are gonna need some serious TLC. And by TLC, I mean they're one step away from exploding, Jax sighed. Just once I'd like to face an enemy with a sense of self-preservation. Rin smirked, her eyes glued to the console. What? You don't think the Earthans appreciate a good tactical retreat? Not unless it's us doing the retreating, Jax replied, glancing at the cube with the kind of resentment usually reserved for ex-lovers and tax collectors. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared again, their shrill cries echoing through the ship like a dozen banshees on a caffeine binge. Rin's eyes widened. We've got boarding parties. They're coming in hot. Guess they couldn't wait for the invitation, Zeke muttered, reaching under his console for a sidearm that looked like it had seen better days. Jack stood, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like gravity cranked up to 11. All right, crew, time for our last stand. Rin, keep us moving. Zeke, you're with me. Let's show these Earthans what happens when you mess with a bunch of desperate idiots. Zeke grinned, a manic glint in his eyes. Time to make some new friends. They left the bridge, the air thick with tension and the smell of fried circuits. Jax's hand brushed the cube as he passed, its surface smooth and indifferent to their plight. Whatever secrets it held, they would remain locked away for now. The corridors of the Vigilance were a maze of metal and shadows, the occasional flickering light casting long, eerie reflections on the walls. The ship shuddered again, the distant thump of Earthan boarding pods making it clear they weren't alone anymore. Zeke and Jax reached the main hold, the sounds of forced entry growing louder. Zeke looked at Jax, eyes narrowed. Got any brilliant plans, fearless leader? Jax took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. We fight dirty, use the ship to our advantage, and remember they might be stronger but we're scrappier. A metallic clang echoed through the corridor, followed by the hiss of a plasma torch slicing through the airlock. Jax raised his weapon, the weight familiar and comforting in his hands. Get ready. They're not here for tea. The door burst open, and the Earthans poured through, sleek and menacing in their dark armor. Jax squeezed the trigger, the blaster kicking in his grip as he fired into the mass of intruders. Energy bolts flew, the air thick with the smell of ozone and the screams of metal. Zeke ducked behind a crate, popping up to return fire with a grin that was more feral than friendly. Welcome aboard, assholes. The Earthans moved with precision, their weapons barking with brutal efficiency. Jax ducked, rolled, and fired, his mind a blur of adrenaline and survival instinct. Zeke, any ideas? Besides shooting them? Maybe smash the lights, make it harder for them to target us. Jax nodded, aiming for the overhead panel. A few well-placed shots and the hold plunged into semi-darkness, shadows dancing across the walls like ghosts at a rave. The Earthens hesitated, their movements disrupted by the sudden change. "Now, hit them hard," Jax shouted, moving forward, his blaster spitting fire. Zeke whooped, the sound barely audible over the chaos. He leaped from cover, launching himself at the nearest Earthen with a wildness that bordered on insanity. You picked the wrong ship. The fighting was close and brutal, the air filled with the acrid tang of sweat and fear. Jax brawled with a desperation that bordered on madness, his blaster empty and discarded as he grappled hand-to-hand with an Earthen. Every punch was a question, every kick a demand. Why them? Why now? The Earthens were relentless, advancing with the grim determination of a tax audit. But Jax and Zeke were fighting for more than just survival. They were fighting for their ship, their lives, their very right to exist. Jax found himself pressed against a bulkhead, an Earthen looming over him with a blade that glinted ominously in the dim light. "You will surrender," the Earthen crooned, voice dripping with contempt. "Surrender this," Jax snarled, kicking out with all his strength. The Earthen staggered just enough for Jax to grab a nearby wrench and swing it with a satisfying crunch. The Earthen fell and Jax panted, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. "Zeke, how you holding up?" Zeke was panting, a cut on his forehead dripping blood, but his eyes were wild and alive. "Still kicking, but they're not stopping, Jax." "We need a plan," Jax nodded, scanning the hold for anything they could use. "The airlock controls, we could vent them into space." Zeke shook his head. "And us with them unless you've suddenly become a vacuum-resistant mutant." Jax's eyes caught the glint of the control panel. An idea, half-formed and reckless, bubbled up. "Maybe we don't vent us, just them. A controlled breach enough to suck them out without tearing the whole ship apart." "And what's your plan to stop us from joining them?" Zeke asked, skepticism clear. "Mag boots," Jax said, pointing to the lockers. "If we can get them on in time." Zeke grinned, a wild, desperate hope in his eyes. "Well, I always did like living dangerously." Together, they scrambled for the lockers, pulling out the magnetic boots with hands that shook more from adrenaline than fear. The Earthens were regrouping, their numbers still overwhelming. Jax's fingers flew over the control panel, programming the breach with a speed that surprised even him. "Get ready. This is gonna be close." The Earthens advanced again, their steps echoing ominously. Jax met Zeke's eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. If this was their end, at least they'd go down swinging. "On my mark," Jax shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. 3, 2, 1, he hit the control and all hell broke loose. The airlock shuddered, a deafening roar as the breach opened. The Earthens, caught in the sudden vacuum, staggered and then were pulled inexorably toward the opening. Jax and Zeke clung to their anchors, the force threatening to tear them from their makeshift sanctuary. The Earthens fought, but it was a losing battle. One by one they were sucked out into the void, their screams lost to the silent expanse of space. Jax gritted his teeth, every muscle straining to hold on. The seconds stretched into eternity, and then, with a final, shuddering gasp, the breach sealed. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the two humans left standing. Jax looked at Zeke, a shaky grin breaking through his exhaustion. "We're still here," Zeke laughed, a wild, joyous sound that echoed through the hold. "Damn right we are. But what now, Captain?" Jax slumped against the wall, the weight of their victory and the uncertainty of their future crashing over him like a wave. "Now we fix the ship, figure out what to do with this damned cube, and try to stay one step ahead of anyone else who wants a piece of us." Zeke nodded, his expression sobering. "And the Earthens?" Jax's gaze drifted to the viewscreen, the nebula outside still swirling in its silent dance. "They'll be back, but so will we. We might be down, but we're not out." Rin's voice crackled through the intercom, a lifeline in the dark. "You guys still alive down there?" Jax grinned, despite everything. "Alive and kicking. Bring us home, Rin. We've got work to do." Rin's voice crackled over the intercom again, laced with the kind of dry humor that could sandblast a smile off a clown. "So, you guys make it out alive, or am I talking to ghosts?" Jax let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, staring at the flickering interface that had just saved their collective asses. "Yeah, more or less. But give it time, space might finish what the Earthans couldn't." Zeke wiped blood from his brow with the back of his hand, grinning like a man who just discovered that coffee was back on the menu. "I'd say we're solidly in the less category. But hey, still breathing." "That's debatable," Jax muttered, glancing around the wreckage of the hold. "Rin, how's the ship holding up?" "Shields are still at 60%, navigation's throwing a tantrum, and the coffee machine's still just an overpriced paperweight," Rin replied, her voice a cocktail of sarcasm and resignation. "But the good news is we're not dead yet." "Small victories," Jax replied, shaking his head. "Get us as far from this nebula as possible. I don't need more surprises today." "Copy that, Captain," Rin said, and the connection cut with a satisfying click. Jax exhaled deeply, looking at Zeke. "All right, what's next on our list of horrible ideas?" Zeke chuckled and pointed at the obsidian cube that lay forgotten amidst the chaos, its surface as smooth and unyielding as ever. "What do you think that thing does, besides ruin our day?" "Looks like an expensive paperweight, much like the coffee machine," Jax said, his eyes narrowing as he considered the artifact. "But if the Earthans want it so badly, it's got to be more than just decorative." Zeke leaned back against the bulkhead, his expression thoughtful. "Think it's a weapon, maybe a bomb. Knowing our luck, it's probably a cursed Rubik's Cube," Jax replied, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "Only one way to find out." Zeke arched an eyebrow. "You want to poke the angry alien box with a stick." "Sounds like a terrible idea. I love it." "That's the spirit," Jax said, moving towards the cube. "But first we need something to interface with it. Something old, maybe. Like ancient." "In this rust bucket, we're loaded with ancient tech," Zeke said, scanning the room for inspiration. "Rin mentioned something about an old data module when we first got this ship." "Maybe that'll do the trick." Jax nodded, the gears in his brain turning faster than the Vigilance's engines ever could. "All right, let's find that module. Who knows, maybe we can turn this cube into our salvation, or at least something that won't get us killed immediately." They made their way through the ship, weaving around debris and the occasional flickering console. The Vigilance groaned around them like a grumpy old man woken up from his afternoon nap. They reached the storage bay where a pile of forgotten technology lay in disarray. Zeke rifled through the mess, tossing aside components with a casual disregard for their original purpose. "Who even uses tech this old? I half expect to find a rotary phone in here." Jax smirked. "Probably works better than most of our systems." Zeke held up a dusty, battered data module, grinning like he'd just found the last bottle of whiskey in the universe. "Think this is it?" "Only one way to find out," Jax said, taking the module. "Let's see if it plays nice with our mysterious friend over there." They returned to the hold, the cube still sitting where they'd left it, as if mocking their every attempt to understand it. Jax connected the data module to the cube with a few well-placed cables and a silent prayer to any gods willing to listen. The cube hummed, a low, thrumming sound that resonated through the floor. Jax took a step back, eyeing it warily. "Well, it's doing something. Let's hope it's not about to explode." Zeke watched, his expression a mix of awe and anxiety. "If it does, I want it on record that this was your idea." The cube's surface shimmered, symbols glowing like stars in the void. Lines of light danced across its surface, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. The room was bathed in an eerie glow, the air thick with anticipation. Jax leaned closer, peering at the symbols. "Looks like some kind of interface. Maybe a map or instructions." Zeke squinted at the light, scratching his head. "So what? We just touch stuff until something happens." Jax grinned, a reckless glint in his eye. "Sounds like a plan." He reached out, his fingers hovering over the cube's surface. The symbols shifted, responding to his presence with a fluidity that was almost organic. He pressed a sequence that felt right. guided more by instinct than understanding. The cube shuddered, and for a moment, Jax wondered if he just triggered the galaxy's most sophisticated self-destruct sequence. But instead, the lights focused, converging into a single point that projected a holographic display into the air. "Well, would you look at that," Zeke said, wonder softening his normally hard-edged voice. "It's a navigational map, but not like any I've ever seen." Jack studied the display, a web of stars and waypoints spiraling in a mesmerizing dance. "Looks like it's showing us a path, something the Earthans wanted, no doubt. Think it's a shortcut, secret route. Or maybe it leads to something big," Zeke suggested, his eyes wide with possibilities. "Maybe all of the above," Jax mused. "Whatever it is, it's enough to make the Earthans chase us halfway across the galaxy. And now we've got it." Zeke's grin was infectious, a flash of optimism in the murky depths of their predicament. "Well then, Captain, shall we hit the road?" Jax nodded, a sense of purpose reigniting amidst the chaos. "Rin, you getting all this?" Rin's voice crackled over the intercom, tinged with excitement that matched their own. "Loud and clear, Captain. Looks like we've got ourselves a treasure map." "Set course for whatever the hell this thing is pointing to," Jax ordered, unable to suppress a grin of his own. "Let's see if we can find ourselves a way out of this mess." "Consider it done," Rin replied, her fingers already dancing over the navigation controls. As the Vigilance lumbered into motion, Jax felt a surge of hope, a flicker of defiance against the darkness that had shadowed their journey. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time they had a direction, a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find the answers they needed. Zeke clapped him on the shoulder, his grin a beacon of camaraderie. "We might actually pull this off." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Jax cautioned, though his heart wasn't in it. "We've still got Earthans to worry about, and I'm sure the cube isn't done messing with us yet. But at least we're not just sitting ducks anymore," Zeke said, the thrill of the chase bright in his eyes. "Yeah, we're moving ducks now," Jax replied, smirking as he watched the stars stream by through the viewscreen. They had a long way to go, and the universe wasn't about to roll out the red carpet. But as long as they had each other, as long as they had their wits and the vigilance, they'd keep fighting, keep running, keep surviving. "All right, let's buckle down and see what other surprises this relic has in store for us," Jax said, settling into his seat with a renewed sense of determination. Zeke joined him, the adrenaline of battle giving way to a quieter resolve. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The ship shuddered again, a gentle reminder of the battles fought and the scars earned. But this time it felt like a challenge, a dare to push forward regardless of the odds, and so they would. Rin's voice cut through the quiet moment, a lifeline tethering them to reality. "We've got movement on the long-range scanners. Could be Earthans." "Of course it could," Jax muttered, rubbing his temples. "They just can't take a hint." "Think they'll follow us into whatever this map is leading us to?" Zeke asked, eyes narrowing at the prospect of another confrontation. "I'd bet my last ration bar on it," Jax replied. "But maybe we can use that to our advantage. If this map leads to something useful, maybe we can turn the tables. Or lead them straight to their demise," Rin chimed in, her voice a mix of hope and pragmatism. "Either way, we're not going down without a fight," Jax said, the fire in his voice unmistakable. "Let's keep them on our tail, but not too close. We'll need breathing room when we reach whatever destination this map has in store." Zeke nodded, his resolve mirrored in the burn of his gaze. "We'll keep them guessing, keep them at arm's length." "Exactly," Jax said, the plan forming in his mind like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "We'll need every advantage we can get." The Vigilance sailed through the void, a lone ship on a path fraught with danger and mystery. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Jax didn't dread the journey ahead. He welcomed it. "Let's make the Earthans regret ever crossing paths with us," Jax declared, a fierce grin breaking through the tension. Zeke chuckled, flexing fingers still itching for a fight. "With pleasure, Captain." And as the Vigilance hurtled toward the unknown, the crew knew their journey was far from over. But they were ready, and they would face whatever came with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that sometimes the universe threw you a curveball, and sometimes you had to punch it right back. Jack stared at the holographic map, its web of stars casting ghostly patterns on his face. It was as if the universe had vomited up a spaghetti tangle of light and expectation. Somewhere in that cosmic mess was their way out, or at least a way to make the Earthans regret waking up this millennium. He rubbed his temples and sighed. "Rin, how's our course looking?" Jax called, the words feeling more like a plea than a command. "About as steady as a drunk on a tightrope," Rin replied over the intercom, her voice crackling with the ship's ever-present static. "Navigation's still acting like it's on its last legs, but it'll get us where we're going. Eventually." "Perfect," Jax muttered. "Just like the rest of this ship." Zeke was busy fiddling with the cube, poking at it like a kid who found a potentially explosive toy under the tree. "Think the map's got any surprises for us? Like maybe an earthen repellent button, if only," Jack snorted. "But I'm starting to think it might hold more than just pretty pictures. Something's humming in there." "Yeah, and I bet it's not singing us lullabies," Zeke replied, his fingers lingering over the cube's symbols. "What if there's something dangerous inside, or useful? Maybe it's got some kick-ass ancient tech." Jax's eyes flicked to the shimmering projection, ideas churning like a storm. "Well, it's meant to be some kind of guide. Maybe it wants us to use something. An interface, a weapon, hell, maybe even a new coffee machine." Zeke laughed, a harsh bark that echoed in the cramped cockpit. "Now that would be a miracle." Jax leaned back, the seat creaking in protest. "All right, let's try following the map, see if it offers us anything beyond a long walk to the gallows. Rin, keep an eye on those earthen ships. We don't want them getting too cozy." "Don't worry, Captain," Rin replied, her voice dry as a desert wind. "I'm watching them like a hawk with trust issues." As the Vigilance plowed through the cosmos, the ship's familiar groans and rattles provided an oddly comforting soundtrack. The kind you might hear in a haunted house if the ghosts were too tired to bother scaring you. "Any bright ideas on how to deal with the Earthans when they catch up?" Zeke asked, casting a worried glance at the control panel. "Because I'm fresh out." "Well, they're stubborn, I'll give them that. But maybe we can give them a taste of their own medicine," Jax mused, eyes narrowing. The cube seemed to pulse in agreement, its power tantalizingly out of reach. He leaned over to look at the glowing symbols. They danced mockingly, like they held all the secrets in the universe but weren't willing to share unless they got a proper bribe. Suddenly, the ship's alarm blared, a shrill whine that could wake the dead. "Incoming earthen ships," Rin reported, her voice strained. "They're closing in fast." "Of course they are," Jax muttered. "All right, let's see if this cube can do more than just look menacing." Zeke nodded and began pressing combinations on the cube, his fingers a blur. It responded with a series of clicks and whirs, like an old computer booting up after a long nap. The symbols flared brightly, and a new projection appeared, this one hovering ominously beneath the map. "Now what do we have here?" Zeke murmured, eyes wide with curiosity. The new projection revealed a complex pattern like a circuit diagram designed by a madman. Jax felt a shiver of anticipation. "It looks like an interface of some kind, maybe a control panel, or the countdown to something exciting," Zeke suggested, his grin more than a little manic. Jax hesitated, then reached out, his fingers hovering over the glowing symbols. "Rin, if this ship suddenly decides to launch itself into a star, you have my permission to say I told you so." "Duly noted," Rin replied, though the humor in her voice was tinged with real concern. Jax touched a sequence that seemed to resonate within him, a gut feeling cultivated by years of avoiding death by inches. The cube hummed louder, the vibrations coursing through the Vigilance like an electric current. The ship shuddered, not its usual grumpy old man routine but something more primal, as if waking up from a deep slumber. Lights flickered across the consoles, and the air thrummed with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Jax, I think you did something," Zeke said, his voice a mix of awe and trepidation. On the view screen, the Earthen ships grew closer, their sleek forms cutting through space with all the grace of predators on the hunt. Jack swallowed, his mind racing. "Rin, are you seeing this?" he asked, heart pounding in his chest. "Yeah, and it's not exactly reassuring," Rin replied, her tone sharp. "Whatever you did, I hope it's good, because those Earthens are about to give us a hell of a welcome party." As if in response, the Vigilance's systems flared to life, displays lighting up in rapid succession. Data scrolled across the screens too fast to follow, and the ship's hull vibrated with a power that seemed to come from someplace beyond its battered shell. "What the hell is happening?" Zeke asked, his voice rising above the chaos. "I think," Jax began, a wild thought taking shape. "I think we just activated something big." The ship's AI chimed in, its voice an eerie monotone. "Defense protocol activated, preparing to engage hostile forces." Jax exchanged a wild-eyed look with Zeke. "Did we just wake up the ship's ancient defense system?" "Looks like it," Zeke replied, his grin as infectious as ever. "Guess the cube had more surprises in store." The Vigilance's hull lit up with a cascade of energy, the shields flaring to life with newfound strength. On the view screen, the Earthen ships faltered, their approach stalling as the unexpected defense caught them off guard. Jax leaned forward, adrenaline surging through his veins. "All right, let's see what you've got, old girl." The ship responded with a keening wail, a sound like a battle cry echoing through the void. Beams of light shot from the Vigilance, arcing across the expanse toward the Earthen vessels. The first ship exploded in a brilliant flash, debris scattering like stars. "Holy shit," Zeke breathed, his eyes wide. "We've got some serious firepower here. Looks like we're not quite as defenseless as we thought," Jax said, a fierce satisfaction roaring through him. "Rin, status." "The Earthens are retreating," Rin replied, her voice tinged with disbelief. "They're scattering like roaches." "Good," Jax said, his grin feral. "Let's make sure they remember not to mess with us again." The Vigilance unleashed another volley, the beams cutting through the remaining Earthen ships with surgical precision. One by one, the enemy vessels disintegrated, the remnants swallowed by the vastness of space. As the last ship vanished, silence descended like a heavy cloak. The Vigilance's systems powered down, the ship returning to its usual creaky self. But the sense of victory lingered, a pulse of triumph that steadied Jax's racing heart. "Well, that was fun," Zeke said, leaning back with a sigh of relief. "Guess we showed them not to mess with a ship full of surprises." Jax chuckled, his tension easing as the adrenaline faded. "Yeah, we did, but this cube, it's something else entirely." Rin's voice interrupted their thoughts, her tone both amused and relieved. "Looks like we've got more than just a map. That cube's packing some serious heat." "It's a defense AI," Jax realized, the truth clicking into place. "Built into the cube, probably as a safeguard. That's why the Earthens wanted it so badly. So we've got our hands on a piece of tech that's worth its weight in gold," Zeke said, shaking his head in wonder. "And we just used it to kick some serious Earthen ass." Jax stared at the cube, its surface now still and unassuming. It held secrets, potential, and a power that could change everything. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. "Rin, let's set a course away from here," Jax said, the weight of their victory settling over him. "We've got what we came for, and I don't want to stick around for any encores." "Roger that, Captain," Rin replied, her fingers flying over the controls. Setting course now. As the Vigilance turned toward the unknown, Jax allowed himself a moment to breathe, to savor the fact that, against all odds, they'd managed to survive another day. The threat was neutralized, and for now, they had the upper hand. Zeke clapped him on the shoulder, his expression a mix of pride and exhaustion. "You did good, Jax, we all did." "Yeah," Jax agreed, his voice soft with gratitude. "We've got a fighting chance now." The cube sat silent between them, its secrets patiently waiting to be unraveled. It was more than just a relic, it was a key, a weapon, and perhaps their salvation. "Let's hope the next stop on this map has fewer explosions," Zeke said, his grin wry. "Here's hoping," Jax replied, settling into his seat as the stars stretched out before them. Together, they'd face the darkness and emerge stronger for it. With each other, their wits, and a ship full of surprises, the future was anything but bleak. They'd keep running, keep fighting, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find a place to call their own. The Vigilance sailed onward, a lone ship on a journey through the unknown, but this time it carried with it a spark of hope, and perhaps the promise of something greater. And as Jax looked out at the stars, he couldn't help but smile. Jax Morrow leaned back in his captain's chair, the leather creaking under his weight like an old man grumbling about the state of the universe. The Vigilance had finally decided to stop throwing a tantrum and return to its usual symphony of minor mechanical complaints. The flickering viewscreen now showed the retreating forms of the Earthen ships, tail tucked firmly between their razor-sharp fins. A rare and beautiful sight, if one had a taste for cosmic schadenfreude. "Well, we're still breathing," Jax said, rubbing a hand over his face, "and the ship hasn't spontaneously combusted. I'm marking this down as a win." Zeke, still hunched over the obsidian cube like a kid with a new toy, glanced up with a grin that looked entirely too manic given their recent brush with annihilation. "Nice to be on the delivering end of a whooping for once. Think they'll send us a thank you card, only if they're the kind of folks who put arsenic in the envelope." Rin's voice crackled over the intercom. "But don't worry, Captain. I won't order champagne until we're out of this damned nebula." Jax nodded, his eyes flicking back to the cube. For all its promise, the thing was like a loaded gun sitting on a wobbly table. Someone would eventually bump into it and the results would be explosive. Literally. "All right, meeting time, folks," Jax ordered, tapping a command into his console. "We need to talk about our little black box of tricks." The ship's interior was as cramped and cluttered as ever, but the crew managed to squeeze into the briefing room. Jax, Zeke, and Rin sat around a table that had seen better days, its surface marred with scorch marks and what looked suspiciously like a petrified piece of alien fruit. "So, the cube," Zeke began, waving a hand like he was introducing a prize at a dodgy auction. "It's not just a fancy paperweight. It's got an AI that makes most military tech look like a child's toy." "Great," Rin deadpanned. "We've got the universe's most dangerous Rubik's Cube." Jax couldn't help but chuckle. "If only we could sell it on Space Bay and retire." "But seriously," Zeke continued, his expression sobering, "this thing is powerful. The kind of power that attracts attention. We've already seen what it can do, and I doubt the Earthens are the only ones who'd want it. Which brings us to the big question," Jax said, leaning forward. "Do we keep it hidden or do we use it?" Rin raised an eyebrow. "Use it? For what?" "Opening cans, no," Jax replied, "for protecting Earth." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down like a starship's gravity well. The Vigilance might be a rickety bucket of bolts, but it was their home, and Earth was the closest thing they had to a planet worth protecting. Earth's defenses are, let's be generous and say adequate, Zeke said, his tone dripping with irony. "But this could tip the scales or paint a giant target on us," Rin countered. "We'd be shouting, 'Look what we've got,' to every opportunistic bastard out there." "True," Jax conceded, "but leaving it in the wrong hands. I'd rather face an Earth and Death squad than deal with the fallout of that." They all paused to consider the scenario. The universe was a vast, uncaring expanse, and they were just trying to make their way through it without getting crushed under someone else's ambitions. "I say we keep it," Zeke finally said, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he was hanging on for dear life. "Use it when we need it, but don't go advertising it." Rin smirked. "Ah, the classic possess a superweapon but pretend you don't strategy. It's worked for empires right up until it didn't." Jax sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, I know it's a risk, but we're already up to our necks in risks. What's one more? Just another day in paradise," Zeke quipped, leaning back in his chair. "Exactly," Jax said. "Besides, we're good at keeping secrets. Hell, we kept that business on Ypsilon 5 under wraps, didn't we? Only because the witnesses were too drunk to remember," Rin pointed out. "Details, details," Jax replied with a dismissive wave. All right, it's settled then. We keep the cube and we stay low-key about it. Rin, any updates on our course? Still heading away from the nebula, Captain. I'm taking us through the least hazardous section of the sector. Should keep most of the nasties at bay, good. Make sure the coffee machine doesn't explode while you're at it, Zeke snorted. If it does, at least we'll have caffeinated shrapnel. The laughter that followed was like a salve, easing the tension that had gripped them since the Earthen encounter. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by duct tape, sarcasm, and a shared determination to survive. As the meeting wrapped up, Jax lingered, staring at the cube resting innocuously on the table. It was a Pandora's box, a key to power and devastation wrapped in one sleek package. "You all right, Captain?" Rin asked, pausing at the doorway. "Just thinking," he replied, not taking his eyes off the cube. "About how life used to be simpler when all we had to worry about was paying off old man Jenkins for that shipment of questionable liquor. Ah, the good old days," Rin said with mock wistfulness. "When our biggest worry was an angry barkeep, not interstellar war," Jax chuckled. "Yeah, those were the days. Now we've got bigger fish to fry," Rin nodded, her expression softening. "We'll get through it, Jax." "We always do." With that she left, leaving Jax alone with his thoughts and the cube that had become both a burden and a beacon of hope. It was a reminder that humanity had always been a scrappy, stubborn race. They weren't going to roll over, not for Earthens, not for anyone. Jax turned away, resolving to keep moving forward. The universe might be a harsh and unforgiving place, but they were tougher. They had to be. As the Vigilance sailed through the stars, Jax allowed himself a small, hopeful thought. Maybe, just maybe, they'd find a place where they could stop running, a place to call home, but until then they'd keep fighting. After all, it was what they did best.